The standard operating procedure inside the Clinton Secretary of State office was to send emails that couldn't otherwise be printed to the maid to print them out of a secure area or from a secure area and then hand them off. Any security professional, military, government or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for being so reckless with this kind of information. The fact that she wouldn't be held accountable for this, I think, blows the mind of anyone who's held our nation's secrets dear, who's had a top secret clearance like I have and others, who know that even one hiccup causes a problem, let alone a standard procedure like this.
That was Pete Hegseth back in 2016 discussing Hillary Clinton's emails. Fast forward to today, and the Trump White House continues to stand by Defense Secretary Hegseth as concerns grow about the Yemen attack plans he shared on 2 separate Signal group chats that we know of. NBC News has learned those plans were first sent to Hegseth by the head of U.S. Central Command through a secure government system that they use to communicate. But the chief Pentagon spokesperson denies Hegseth shared any classified information through his personal phone on Signal. Joining us now, retired 4-star Admiral William McRaven. He's the author of the new book, Conquering Crisis: 10 Lessons to Learn Before You Need Them, which is on sale now. And Admiral, we're going to talk about the book, but actually this story applies. Your thoughts on Secretary Hegseth? What would happen if anybody who worked in our military structure or defense structure did this? Yeah. And is there a double standard as it appears from what you know to be true, right, in terms of the rules, how they should be followed, and what are the consequences if not, and what's happening with this Secretary of Defense? Yeah, well, I'd start by saying, like, what I want Pete Hegseth to be successful. Every American should want the Secretary of Defense to be successful. But in a crisis like this, and particularly a crisis of your own making, as it appears, this is the time you need to step forward and you need to be honest and you need to be transparent, because at the end of the day, the truth will always come out. So you've got to stand in front of the rank and file. And I would offer to Secretary Hegseth, stand in front of the men and women in the military and say, look, I made a mistake. I'm new at the job. I'm learning. I made a mistake. It was an egregious mistake. And I'm going to correct this and we're going to move on. By continuing to kind of push this aside and to pretend like it didn't happen, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, they understand this was a mistake. They'll forgive you and they'll continue to follow you if you stand up and you accept responsibility for making the mistake. If you keep blaming everybody else on it, then they're beginning to wonder, well, if you don't hold yourself accountable, how can we within the chain of command hold others accountable? That's, I think, the real question here, because the accountability or lack thereof is very invalidating for the people he is leading. So you think he can continue to lead, but in order to be able to lead effectively, he has to take accountability. Absolutely. In the book, I talk about Ronald Reagan during the Iran-Contra. And Ronald Reagan continued to say, no, I really didn't have much to do with this. But, of course, over the course of a year and a half, it all comes out. His poll numbers dropped and people lost confidence in him. Whenever you're in a crisis, you confront it head on and you say, look, it's a problem. In this case, I made a mistake. Now we're going to correct it. Now let's move on. But the other thing I would offer to Secretary Hegseth is you have to surround yourself with people that will speak truth to power. Rely on, you've got a new chairman, Dan Kane. Dan Kane is a fabulous officer. And if you go to Dan Kane and say, hey, should I be doing this or should I be doing that? Dan Kane will give you his best military advice. Don't surround yourself with acolytes. Surround yourself with people that will speak truth to power and tell you when you're doing something wrong. Well, that doesn't seem to be the guiding philosophy right now at this point. Is there any doubt in your mind that what is in those Signal chats that we've all seen publicly now was inappropriate to be shared in a commercial app on a phone? Right. So I haven't seen the recent ones to his wife and brother, but the last ones, absolutely. I mean, look, they are not war plans. So I think this is where they have kind of been parsing the words a little bit. War plans are like the invasion of Iraq. But were they tactical plans? Were they operational plans? Absolutely. Now, again, there were time constraints. So they're classified until all of a sudden the strike occurs, and then you can make the case that they're no longer classified. But, of course, it's classified information, and it was inappropriate. But it's okay. Again, stand up, say, look, I made a mistake. This was inappropriate. I'm going to correct it. We're going to move on.
And that's, by the way, John, what we've been saying at the table all along. If they'd come out 2 days later and say, that was a terrible mistake, it'll never happen again, we apologize. If they just give it more fuel every day, and they continue this morning.
Yeah, which is the ethos coming from the White House in many ways. And Admiral, but as you mentioned the idea of don't surround yourself with acolytes. Well, the secretary did, and yet they're being fired anyway. So speak to us about that, just this disruption at the top of the Pentagon here, those closest to the secretary. And I and others have reported just how isolated he is right now, where his counsel is, his wife, his brother, on that signal chain. How worrisome is that for everyone else in the Pentagon?
Yeah, so, he's not in a unsalvageable position. I do think he can salvage his position as Secretary of Defense, but he's going to have to do it quickly. Again, he's going to have to rely on people that aren't part of his inner circle, that aren't the acolytes, people that, as I said before, will tell him the truth. Will tell him, Mr. Secretary, you shouldn't do that. If you look at the signal gate that happened, there was not a single uniformed military person on that thread. Because I guarantee you, if there had been a uniformed person on that thread, they would have said, respectfully, Mr. Secretary, this is inappropriate. Stick with the classified network that we use, as Mika mentioned, to pass information, and you'll be fine. Don't do it on signal.
So as we look through the book, there are just some great lessons for any kind of leadership, whether you're running the Pentagon or a Little League baseball team. Weaponize the truth caught my eye. There's been so much debate about truth and truthiness over the last several years. You say, be transparent in your actions to resolve a crisis. The truth can be a great weapon against misperception and distrust. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, like I said, at the end of the day, the truth is going to come out. So the sooner you address the problem, the sooner you own up to it, the sooner you accept responsibility for it, the sooner you can begin to deal with the crisis. So if you don't weaponize the truth, and that may be a little strong word, but we talked about it during Iraq and Afghanistan, that the importance was to make sure the people in Iraq and Afghanistan got the truth as we saw it, the facts on the ground. You've got to come forward, lay out the truth, show people that you've got a plan to get through this, and use that as, again, one of the arrows in your quiver.
So let's talk about the other one of those lessons is there's always time for a morale check with your team. Tell us what that means, because obviously, you certainly know better than anyone the idea of we have to work together to get this done, a very sensitive mission done, but you got to check on those you're with along the way.
Yeah, correct. I mean, if you think about, again, let's go back to Secretary Hegseth. I have no doubt, again, I don't know this from personal experience, but I have no doubt that the morale in the Pentagon is a little bit down now. Well, this is the time for the Secretary to get out, again, show he's got a plan for moving forward, talk to the rank and file, explain to them, what he's going to do to get past this crisis. Because, as you said, if you don't have the people in your organization, if their morale isn't good, then it's going to be hard to call upon them to get through the difficult times. If their morale is good, they're going to perform well, they're going to help you through these difficult times. And so morale is very important. I mean, this is what leaders have to do, build morale in the organization.
I'm curious if there's leadership advice on dealing with bullies. I mean, if you think of what's going on with Harvard and these universities and these law firms and DEI, there's a lot of people who are in a position where they feel that something is coming their way, that they are being bullied. Is the best option to back down and try and think of a different way to negotiate this? What do you do with a bully?
Look, it goes back to my 2014 commencement address and my first book, Make Your Bed, where I talked about the sharks, the sharks being the bullies in the world. You can't back down from the sharks. You have to stand up to the bullies. And whether you are Harvard or Columbia or the law firms or the press, you better stand tall. You better understand what your values are and what you stand for, or the fight is going to get exceedingly hard. If you know what your values are, then the decisions after that are a lot easier. I teach a class at UT, and I give them a strategic framework for thinking about difficult situations. And the first thing I tell them is, you have to ask yourself the question, who are we? Who are we as a nation? If we're just going to be a nation that's transactional, then that's not a good way to do national security. That's not a good way to kind of run the railroad. We're a nation that understands our values. Our values ought to be the foundation for everything we do. We're a democracy. We believe in human rights. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in the Constitution. These are fundamental to who we are. If you're Harvard, ask yourself, who are we? If you're the law firm, ask yourself, who are we? Because if you don't know who you are, if you haven't framed your values and your principles, then you're probably going down a bad road and you're not going to get through this crisis.
Those values are being tested everywhere right now. That's well said. I want to ask you just a military assessment of what's happening in Ukraine right now and our position. It seemed to be leaning, under this new administration at least, a little more toward Russia.
Right.
Negotiations in Europe today. Again, Secretary Rubio not participating because Ukraine says, no, we're not going to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. So they're obviously going to be, it's not going to be easy as Trump predicted it would be. What's your assessment of where America should be as we check our values, as you said? Where should America be in these negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend to the president, we need to stand by Ukraine. Once again, who are we? We're not a transactional nation, or we shouldn't be a transactional nation. We ought to support other nations that believe in the same principles we do. And when you take a look at President Zelensky, you know, Ukraine is not a perfect democracy, but Zelensky is the duly elected president. They believe in the same sort of values we do. Oh, by the way, this, Putin is a dictator. He invaded Ukraine. I was there about a year and a half ago. You can't help but be inspired by the Ukrainian people.
No.
You cannot give ultimatums to the Ukrainians. I mean, my recommendation would be find a way to establish an armistice where, yes, you're not going to recognize Ukraine as Russian. I mean, that you're giving away concessions to the Russians, but not to the Ukrainians. That's no way to treat your allies, frankly.
The new book is Conquering Crisis, 10 Lessons to Learn Before You Need Them. Retire 4-star Admiral William McRaven. Thank you so much. It's always good to see you and have
Great
you
to be
on
back.
here.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Admiral.